Good evening, everyone, and we want to welcome you to the January 2026 Night with the Experts. We're going into our 60th episode beginning this year. We do this at Nuclear Energy Information Service, which is based in Chicago. And on the last Thursday of each month, we bring you experts from around the country on various nuclear power issues. And this year, we're doing something just a little bit different. We're going to be doing themes this year. And we're starting this year out with frontline communities and discussing various aspects of environmental justice, as well as what is happening in those communities. So tonight, we have some guests from the Pacific Northwest who have been in the trenches far too long. I'm sure they'll tell you that. But very glad to welcome Cathryn and Lloyd to the Night with the Experts tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jan Boudart, who is a member of the NEIS board, and she'll take it from there. So welcome, Cathryn and Lloyd, and Jan, take it away.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see you here. And I am going to ask Cathryn and Lloyd to introduce themselves and start their slideshow so that we can get an idea of who they are and start. But we might as well just start right up. So, Cathryn, if you don't mind introducing yourself, I'd appreciate it. And go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here. My name is Cathryn Chuddy. I've lived out here in the Pacific Northwest since 1977, and I spend half of my time in Vancouver, Washington, and half of my time in a little town called Boring, Oregon. I am retired from being a therapist with suicidal kids and teenagers, and after retirement, I've taken on a lot of other things that include trying to help the world be a safer place for those kids when they grow up, by being actively involved with the Oregon Conservancy Foundation, which is attempting to keep fossil fuels in the ground and to support renewable energy alternatives to nuclear power, which we've opposed for decades. And I am with the Sierra Club's nuclear free team at the national level. I'm a member of the Washington chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm also locally involved in my city of Vancouver with what's called the Alliance for Community Engagement. So we work with city councils and the port and all the different and the county commission around environmental issues here in Vancouver, as well as statewide and region-wide with the Oregon Conservancy Foundation. So I'm happy to be here to share what we're doing around these issues of specifically related to nuclear power and data centers and artificial intelligence. And now I'll hand it over to Lloyd.
I want to welcome everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm Lloyd Marbet. I am the executive director of the Oregon Conservancy Foundation. I've been a longtime anti-nuclear activist in the state of Oregon and also working in the state of Washington on occasion since 1972. So, and I won't take any more time on this except to say that I'm grateful to be here, and I'm glad that you are here as well.
Have all the people been brought in from the waiting room?
Yes,
My screen only shows that.
everyone's here.
Okay. So go ahead, Lloyd and Cathryn.
Okay, let me get to the window here to do the share. And I need to start the presentation. There we go. All right. Our presentation covers the impacts of artificial intelligence, data centers, and nuclear power. It's a big picture attempt to provide a view of this issue from the perspective of the Pacific Northwest. And one thing that characterizes both artificial intelligence and nuclear power is their overwhelming overuse of promotional propaganda. I call it convergent hype. And this quote is from Sam Altman. He's the OpenAI chief executive officer, one of the major companies involved in artificial intelligence. And I was amazed when I came upon this quote, intelligence too cheap to meter is well within grasp. And it immediately reminded me of another quote, which I came across many, many years ago. It is not too much to expect that our children will enjoy in their homes electrical energy too cheap to meter. And that was by Lewis Strauss, who was then chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, and that was in 1954. As an activist, I've done a number of presentations over the years, and I have used that quote in presentations, and I've always asked audiences if anyone would raise their hand to tell me that their meter had been taken off of their house. And so far, I haven't had anyone raise their hand. This presentation, again, is an attempt to try and embrace the big picture and reintroduce to people the impacts of nuclear power. And of course, Albert Einstein said it best, nuclear power is one hell of a way to boil water. And in order to really take a look at nuclear power, you have to look at what I call the unclean nuclear fuel cycle. At the very upper left-hand corner, you see uranium mining, and that's how it begins. Uranium ore that's pulled from the ground has 3 uranium isotopes, but only uranium-235 is fissionable, and uranium ore contains less than 1% of 235. In order to achieve a chain reaction in light water reactors and boiling water reactors, which is what we have in the nuclear fleet that we're dealing with now, it must be enriched up to 5%. And that causes it to go through, as you see at the top of the screen, the milling process, the enrichment process, and the fuel fabrication process. Now, we're going to be talking about advanced reactors, and they seek to operate at a greater burn rates. And the uranium-235 is enriched up to 20% for those kind of reactors, which is close to weapons grade uranium. The arrow that points down at the right-hand corner of your screen contains a picture from X-Energy, one of the advanced reactors, with their what they call their fuel pellet. It's very much different from the light water reactors and boiling water reactors, but all of it is the same in the sense that there's no effort to leave the nuclear fuel cycle. They're all a part of the nuclear fuel cycle, and the except for nuclear power is being sold to us as clean. It's the big hype. And except for power production, quantifiable CO2 emissions are created throughout the fuel cycle. It also creates nuclear waste, the need to transport radioactive materials, unforeseen nuclear accidents, in-life decommissioning, radioactive contamination, and nuclear proliferation risks. And the thing about the ultimate end of the cycle, you see, of course, they have to build the nuclear plants, and they have to, after the nuclear plants have operated for the extent that they can, then there's the decommissioning process. And all of that is generating nuclear waste, and the waste is from the beginning to the end of the process. And in fact, when you look at uranium mining, there are at least 10,000 abandoned uranium mines in the country that need cleanup. So it's not the problem with the way this energy source is being sold to us is it really leaves out the total picture, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. Now, bringing it back to Oregon, the Oregon had an operating nuclear plant that went from 1975 to 1993. In January 3rd of 1993, Trojan steamed, it was called the Trojan nuclear plant. I always loved the name. The Trojan steam generators failed after operating only 18 years of a 40-year license. PGE closed Trojan down. Portland General Electric closed Trojan down with 790 high-level radioactive fuel assemblies in its spent fuel pool. They had to leave the waste. The pool had been expanded a number of times because there never was any effort to take the waste away after it was done being used at the plant. And they had to leave all that in the pool for 10 years until it cooled down enough. And then the spent fuel was put into 34 dry casks on site at what's called Trojan's Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. In 2019, that was after 20 years of that site being operated, their 20-year spent fuel storage license had to be renewed. And this time they wanted another 40 years, which shows you how much confidence they had in the government finally providing a permanent federal high-level nuclear waste repository, which still doesn't exist for any U.S. nuclear power plants. Instead, what we have is depicted in this cartoon by one of my favorite cartoonists, Arcab, and that's interim storage. And of course, the nuclear industry is on the hunt for communities that are willing to take the waste on a temporary basis until maybe someday there's going to be finally a permanent repository. But, you know, the problem with interim is, of course, it's not permanent. And a high-level waste is likely to become that at these sites because it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And all this reminds me of something that I learned in high school, which is a little bit of a diversion here. But in history in high school, I was taught about the story of ancient Carthage and Rome. They were mercantile cities on the Mediterranean, and they competed against each other and eventually went to war with each other. And in the outcome of the war is that Rome won, and they went to Carthage, and they basically, I was told, tilled salt into the soil. So there would be no way for the Carthaginians to renew their community and pursue their agriculture. And when I look at these interim storage sites, I get the same feeling. You know, we worry about nuclear war, but, you know, conventional weapons could release this material just as easily. And that would also achieve the same result as the Romans did with the Carthaginians. When you look at this map from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, you can see that there is more than 90,000 metric tons of radioactive spent fuel from commercial reactors that sits in storage containers scattered across the country on the properties of the nation's operating and retired nuclear plants. You'll also note that most of the waste or the nuclear plants that are operating are on the East Coast. There's a few more on the West Coast, but where they want to put the interim storage sites in this country is in New Mexico and Texas. New Mexico has no nuclear plants. Texas apparently has two. It's ironic that this is where they want to move the waste because it requires that this waste be transported great distances to get to the storage sites. And of course, that raises the issue of how successful that transportation is going to be over time. Not only that, as far as New Mexico goes, they have stopped Holtec's proposed interim storage site Texas now is the only one that's still in the process of being approved, and Texas is fighting it. So apparently Texas doesn't like nuclear waste either. All this reminds me of another quote by E.F. Shoemaker. Back in the 70s, he wrote a book, Small is Beautiful, and this is what he had to say. No degree of prosperity could justify the accumulation of large amounts of highly toxic substances which nobody knows how to make safe and which remain an incalculable danger to the whole of creation for historical or even geological ages. To do such a thing is a transgression against life itself, a transgression infinitely more serious than any crime perpetrated by man. The idea that civilization could sustain itself on such a transgression is an ethical, spiritual, and metaphysical monstrosity. It means conducting the economic affairs of man as if people did not matter at all. And of course, time goes by, and along came Fukushima, and this is the statement from the 79th Prime Minister of Japan. And he says basically the same thing. This is what we're all learning as we see this technology unfold. I foolishly once believed the myth that nuclear energy is clean and safe. That myth has completely broken down. Restarting nuclear reactors while we still have no place to dispose nuclear waste is a criminal act toward future generations. And of course, really what's going on here is the nuclear waste containment vessel is the Earth. We are reversing the Earth's process of decaying out its radiation by creating more opportunities for contamination and the need to dispose of the waste. And then there's the other element of nuclear radiation, the perfect industrial pollutant for polluters. This is a busy slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but it actually is made up of 3 different slides. The ionizing radiation window shows a woman standing, and it shows her internal organs. And it has a list of the isotopes that affect each of those organs, and it's no different for men, women, or children. But the reproductive organs are very sensitive to radiation. You see that in the lower right-hand corner, the fetus inside a woman's womb. And there are 3 different kinds of radiation that we have to deal with when we're dealing with what's created from nuclear power plants. There is alpha radiation, which has 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Just so happens that radiation is emitted by plutonium, which is created in the fissioning of uranium in a reactor. There is the high energy electron, which is beta radiation, and then there's gamma radiation. If exposed to, if it's not acute radiation, very high levels of radiation, you really don't know that you are being exposed to it unless you're told that you are. And you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch or smell it. And once exposed, you can't easily prove health effects due to the latency period. It takes time for damaged cells in your body to show evidence of cancer. And by that time, there's no little red flag that goes up that says, oh, I got this from an exposure to a release of radiation that came from a nuclear power plant, or even what kind of radiation it is. And you see this, the way that you determine that there is a problem from this example, which is a study that was done in the year 2000, 7 years after Trojan's premature closure. Joseph J. Mangano of the Radiation and Public Health Project published a health study documenting infant mortality rates around Trojan and 4 other nuclear plants, both during their operation and after each plant closure. Upon closure, infant deaths decreased at all 5 nuclear plant locations. our understanding of the science of radiation exposure has been pretty much agreed upon, except now there's an effort to change it. There's no safe level of radiation exposure. Yet the Trump administration is pushing to raise allowable radiation exposure from as low as reasonably achievable to below regulatory concern. And on January 9th of this year, the U.S. Department of Energy removed the as low as reasonably achievable standard to go to below regulatory concern. And what does that mean? It just means that whoever is in charge of regulating the nuclear industry can determine for us what it is that is for us to be allowably exposed. It's not based on science. And of course, I think this quote from Albert Schweitzer, the great medical humanitarian doctor, says it all. We are constantly being told about a permissible amount of radiation. Who permitted it? Who has any right to permit it? And now we turn to Amazon's small modular nuclear reactors at Hanford, and Kathy is going to carry on for us on that issue.
So several years ago, oh, hang on, am I on mute? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can. I hope everybody else can.
Okay, sorry. So Joshua Frank wrote a book, Atomic Days, The Untold Story of the Most Toxic Place in America. And Hanford is the most heavily contaminated radioactive waste site in the Western Hemisphere. The Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington was home to the United States' largest plutonium production site used to make the atomic bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki in World War II, turning the whole area into a sacrifice zone. Our government forced the displacement and relocation of the Wanapum Native American Nation and all tribes who had lived along the Columbia River and had used the area for fishing, hunting, food gathering, and religious purposes from time immemorial were denied access. Tribal access today remains restricted despite treaty reserved rights for the Yakama Nation, Nez Perce, Umatilla, and Wanapum Band to hunt, fish, and gather. And it's 8 decades later, and that access is still restricted. Now we come to adding more, and adding new nuclear waste to this legacy extends the colonial burden already carried by the river and affected tribes. Hanford has become the costliest environmental remediation project the world has ever seen, and it's arguably the most contaminated place on the entire planet. Which brings us to X-Energy at Hanford. X-Energy is a nuclear reactor and fuel design company with headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. They signed in July 2023 a joint development agreement for an advanced small modular reactor project next to the Columbia Generating Station. Energy Northwest runs the Columbia Generating Station, which is the only nuclear power plant operating in the Pacific Northwest and the only one remaining from the Washington Public Power's supply system disaster that occurred in the 80s. This proposal by Energy Northwest is to start with 4 and have up to 12 helium-cooled pebble bed nuclear reactor modules that will produce 960 megawatts total, which is certainly not small. The XE100, there's a graphic on the left-hand side. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's on their website. It's a reactor design seeking Nuclear Regulatory Commission approval with no operating history, and its actual costs are unknown. And the other graphic, as Lloyd talked about, is the fuel pebble. They use a HALEU fuel called trisofuel, which they brag about being meltdown proof and walkaway safe, but that has not been demonstrated or proven, so the risks remain. This map shows where Energy Northwest will build Amazon's proposed Cascade Advanced Energy Facility, which is the name they've now given it. And on the right-hand side, you can see the blue arrow with the word Amazon above it, pointing to the location where the Columbia Generating Station now is operating. And this fleet of small modular reactors will follow if this project is successful. And Energy Northwest is very clear. They want to run the Columbia Generating Station for another 80 years, for at least 80 years. And they want to operate not just one or two reactors, but an entire fleet of them. So they have big ambitions for small modular reactors in the Pacific Northwest. This is an artist rendering of a design that's not yet licensed or permitted, but it's being sold to potential investors as the Cascade Advanced Energy Facility. And we have a resource guide that we're going to offer that has more information about how they're going about doing this. But they also include a mock-up of the X-Energy reactor control room, which the project starts with 4 reactors, and this control room will operate those 4 reactors and eventually will operate all 12 modules if and when they ever are built. So this slide shows Energy Northwest pathways for funding these extremely expensive reactors at Hanford. Energy Northwest keeps extending the timeline. This is consistent with all the other designs that they say they're going to come maybe by 2030, then 2035, and it keeps going further out into the future. And Energy Northwest first started with getting about just close to $1 million from 16 Washington state utilities in PUDs, co-ops, and municipalities, selling this as a feasibility study. Let's just study whether or not we can do this. In January of 2024, they received $10 million from Puget Sound Energy, which is the largest investor-owned utility in the state of Washington, that contributed that amount of money in the hopes of having future energy offtakes, but they made no further financial obligation at the time. The project requires a lot more funding than that, and they got a huge boost in October of 2024 when the big tech firm Amazon Corporation showed up with $334 million that they have provided to Energy Northwest to support the engineering, the licensing, and the construction of the first 4 X-Energy reactor modules. In addition, because there was such big money being provided to Energy Northwest, the lobbyists were able to convince the Washington state legislators to contribute $25 million of a budget appropriation from our clean energy funds in the state of Washington. And both the Yakima and the Confederated Tribes opposed this, again, standing behind that there should be no additive waste added at the Hanford site. But the legislators proceeded to pass it and the governor signed it. And this project is still moving forward with the final funding source, or the next leg of it, which is seeking federal taxpayer loan guarantees for up to 80% of the nuclear project costs. So that means we, the federal taxpayers, are the ultimate backstop for this speculative project that may or may not ever be built. Energy Northwest and Amazon are heavily lobbying Washington legislators to support their proposed nuclear reactor project with policy and state funding measures. So this session, 25 to 26, we're fighting 2 bills. One's a policy bill, HB 2090, which would integrate advanced nuclear energy into the state energy strategy, even though the Department of Commerce has determined up till now that it's not cost effective, and it certainly doesn't meet the environmental justice requirements for our Clean Energy Transformation Act, but that gets ignored and they're proceeding. The second bill is a version of the construction work in progress kind of funding where the bill would shift liability from developers to utilities and ratepayers, allowing contracts that would provide that payments be made whether or not the project is completed or operating. So as a ratepayer with the Clark Public Utilities in my public utility district, if my commissioners decide to buy into this project, I could potentially be paying for something that never arrives. Nuclear power in Washington got its foothold over the climate crisis, but advocates ignore the reality that more nuclear power only makes catastrophic climate change worse. Economist David Schlissel has done a lot of research on the economic side of these pursuits of small modular nuclear reactors, and he's identified key risks and warning signs. First, and highly important, is that they're not good tools for fighting climate change. They're too expensive and they take too long to build, particularly since none of the small modular nuclear reactor designs currently being marketed have been built or demonstrated that they can operate safely. They're fighting increasing competition from the declining cost of renewable energy sources plus storage. And one way they try to make some economic traction is that the vendors and potential buyers refuse to make estimated costs public. We see this with TerraPower, X-Energy, GE, Hitachi, and Westinghouse in particular. So that's an additional warning sign, along with when NuScale's small modular nuclear reactor was canceled, it tanked their stock price. So there's an economic warning sign for governments, utilities, ratepayers, and private investors, who we hope will conclude that nuclear power will not be capable of addressing the need to replace fossil fuels in time to stop catastrophic climate change tipping points. We need major investments in renewable energy alternatives now. Any semblance of meaningful regulations is collapsing as the current administration proceeds with gutting nuclear regulatory oversight. I put in the chat earlier an article that was published yesterday, which could be a game changer. The Trump administration has secretly rewritten nuclear safety rules, and National Public Radio published a report that let us know about that and how that's proceeding, and it's pretty scary. In July of 2024, our Congress passed the Accelerated Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy Act, the ADVANCE Act. Its overlay is to greatly increase nuclear power risks by broadening the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's mandate from safety regulation, which has been its primary focus, to industry promotion, which is actually a 50-year step backwards. For context, in 1974, Congress was very concerned over what was then the then Atomic Energy Commission's conflicting mandate of, on one side, regulating nuclear safety, and on the other side, promoting nuclear power. So in their wisdom at the time, they split the Atomic Energy Commission into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to address safety exclusively, and the U.S. Department of Energy to go ahead and promote civilian commercial nuclear power. The ADVANCE Act reverses this, setting us back decades. In addition to that issue, the provisions of the ADVANCE Act create more radioactive waste using our taxpayer dollars. They add more radioactive contamination in the United States and also now abroad. They increase enrichment of uranium and proliferation risks, exporting more nuclear technology to other countries, and for the first time allowing foreign ownership over U.S. nuclear plant sites. Add to that the hypocrisy of the Price-Anderson Act. Back in 1957, Congress passed the Price-Anderson Act, which at the time provided only $60 million in liability coverage for nuclear power plants. And electric utilities found that this was inadequate and they couldn't take the risk of operating them. So the act partially compensates the nuclear industry by establishing a no-fault insurance system in which the first $15 billion as of 2021 is industry funded, and any claims above that amount are covered by taxpayers. So keep in mind the 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident is now estimated to cost as much as $660 billion. $15 billion to the industry, and the taxpayers are on the hook for the rest, and that $15 billion is a drop in the bucket. We also have challenging and changing Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulations. The Advanced Nuclear Reactor Company, Last Energy, joined several states, including Texas, to challenge Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensing of microreactors and small modular nuclear reactors. They allege that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not have the power to regulate emerging nuclear technologies like small modular nuclear reactors and microreactors. There are startup companies seeking exemptions from emergency planning and reactor containment, the things that ultimately keep the public safe. They're streamlining. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is proceeding to streamline environmental review in this time of increasing climate disasters so that they're generic and apply anywhere, not necessarily site-specific. And then on top of all of that, we have the Trump executive orders, which put nuclear power on steroids, and we'll cover that further later in the presentation, all of which arrives at the conclusion that nuclear power is truly unaffordable for we, the public, at any size and on so many levels. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Lloyd to take you through Oregon's 1980 ballot measure law.
In 1980, Oregon voters passed a statutory ballot measure law requiring before a commercial nuclear power plant can be built in Oregon, there must be one, a permanent federally licensed repository for terminal disposition of its high-level nuclear waste, and two, such a repository, if such a repository exists, then a proposed nuclear plant must be put to a statewide vote of the people. For 46 years, no nuclear power plants have been built in Oregon since Trojan. But what's happened in Oregon's legislature since? And this slide shows you that story. There have been a number of bills over the last 10 years that have attempted to either amend or repeal Oregon's ballot measure law. And what you see, if you look at the number of bills, is a crescendoing effect. Here we are in 2025, and 13 bills were sponsored in the legislature, attempting to either a repeal or amend. 9 of them would have repealed all or portions of the 1980 ballot measure law. 2 of the 9 bills had hearings, but both died in committee. The NuScale, which is Oregon's Small Modular Nuclear Reactor company, primarily backed all this legislation over the years. But in 2025, this radically changed, as the next slide will show. The first bill that got a hearing, actually got a hearing and passed out of committee in the Oregon legislature, was a bill that directed the Oregon Department of Energy to study the advantages of nuclear energy, but not its disadvantages. It's kind of interesting how they always seem to leave out the other side of the problem. It is being reintroduced as we speak right now in Oregon's 2026 legislative session, and we will again be embroiled in a battle. The second bill is the one, though, that is of greatest concern to us. HB 2410 birthed the atomic convergence of AI data centers and nuclear power in Oregon. it would have exempt Umatilla County, one county located in eastern Oregon near Hanford, from having to meet the legal requirements for a federally licensed waste repository and a statewide vote of approval for nuclear plants. Only Umatilla County would have voted on creating the Small Modular Nuclear Reactor demonstration project used to power Amazon's data centers. And the thing that was interesting about this demonstration project is it put no limit on the amount of small modular nuclear reactors that could be sited there. So it could end up being full of these small modular reactors. And that's, again, as Kath pointed out, and Hanford is the kind of illusion of this. They talk about small modular, but it really is not small. It's cumulative. Both of these bills were voted out of committee with due pass recommendations. Both were referred to the Joint Ways and Means Committee, since each placed revenue requirements on the state. Both died due to Oregon's budget shortfall. If we had not had this budget shortfall, I'm not certain we could have stopped this, but I must say it was admirable the way people turned out to oppose this. Yet now we confront the combined financial resources of the nuclear industrial complex and the owners of AI data centers, and they got lots of money. So we turn to the impacts of artificial intelligence. Up until this point, I as an activist, did not have a great deal understanding of what was going on with artificial intelligence. I'm much better versed on it now. And I think this quote, I like quotes, sums it up. AI hype is essentially propaganda, the main purpose of which is to accelerate layoffs, to fuel financial speculation, and divert investment and resources toward a new jump into the abyss by economic and political elites. And this is from an environmental engineer and climate change researcher in Lisbon, Portugal. In order to really understand what we're confronting with the problems of artificial intelligence, it's good to look at the dangers. And Gary Marcus, author of a book called Taming Silicon Valley, How We Can Ensure That AI Works for Us, provided that. And he created a list of the 12 greatest dangers of AI. And he starts out with a definition of generative AI, and that refers to a class of artificial intelligent models that generate new content, such as text, images, audio, and even code, based on the patterns and characteristics learned from existing data. And we start with the first immediate danger of AI, which is deliberate, automated, mass-produced political disinformation, manipulating elections. And this is what he had to say about it. Generative AI systems are the machine guns or nukes. Interesting that came up, of disinformation. Then there's market manipulation. Bad actors won't just try to influence elections, they'll also try to influence markets. Then we have accidental misinformation. Large language models can spontaneously generate accidental information. And occasionally I've seen news articles on this, where all of a sudden AI takes off on tangents and provides misinformation. We have defamation. A special case of misinformation is misinformation that hurts people's reputations, whether accidentally or on purpose. And then, of course, there's non-consensual deepfakes. Deepfakes are getting more and more realistic, and their use is increasing. And then we have accelerating crime. The biggest impersonation scam so far seems to have revolved around voice cloning. We have cybersecurity and bioweapons. Generative AI can be used to hack websites, to discover zero-day vulnerabilities unknown to developers in software and phones. All of us are potential victims of this. We have bias and discrimination. Bias has been a problem with AI for years, generating information that is racially profiled, for example. We have privacy and data leaks. Surveillance capitalism takes human experience as free raw material, declared as proprietary, fed into artificial intelligence, and then sold to whoever wants to manipulate you. We have intellectual property taken without consent. AI regurgitates copyrighted material used without consent of creators, a huge transfer of wealth from almost all of us to a tiny number of companies. Over-reliance and unreliable systems. In safety-critical applications, giving large learning models full sway over the world is a huge mistake waiting to happen. And of course, the bottom line, environmental costs. AI companies train bigger and bigger models which require astronomical amounts of energy, which has huge implications for the environment. We're going to get into that, but then there's one more danger, and the greatest danger of AI, not listed on the 12 immediate dangers of AI, is AI developing itself and becoming independent of humans. Developers of artificial intelligence are doing everything to promote its use. Succumbing to it requires a huge expansion of data centers that developers advertise will be powered by clean energy. But this is deceptive, as data centers and cryptocurrency are still being powered by fossil fuels. Not only that, unclean nuclear power and unproven reactor designs are a smokescreen for greenwashing an energy future beset with unconstrained catastrophic climate change and unseen environmental and social justice impacts. And now we get to those environmental impacts. How much water does AI consume? This is from an article that's on our resource guide that you can link to. The resource guide is full of links to all kinds of information that at least I've managed to discover in my research on this. When you look at how AI consumes water, there are two ways. Scope one is the water usage that's directly at the data center itself. The graphic processing units, the computer chips that are housed inside these data centers, heat up tremendously when we're using our computers, our phones, and so forth. And that requires that they have to be cooled. And so this shows that water being drawn from a tap. It's cooled in a chiller, and then that is sent directly into the chips to cool them down, and it recycles out. The second way in which water is consumed at data centers is from their use of electricity. And that, again, is the power plants, which have to, in their process, also be cooled down. Again, there's lots of information in our resource guide that covers this. Now we turn to water itself. Only 3% of Earth's water is fresh water, and only 0.5% of all water is accessible and safe for human consumption. And data centers have an impact on that. A medium-sized data center uses about 110 million gallons of water annually, compared to the water needs of 1,000 households. Larger facilities can consume up to 5 million gallons daily, equivalent to the usage of a town of 10,000 to 50,000 people. The direct on-site consumption ranks data centers among the top 10 water users in America's industrial and commercial sectors. And one report estimated that the US data centers consume 449 million gallons of water per day and 163.7 billion gallons annually. And that was as of 2021, and it's gone beyond that. About 80% of the water withdrawal by data centers evaporates, and the remainder discharged as warm wastewater, which can overwhelm local treatment facilities. And then again, we have the data center indirect water impacts. Power plants, particularly those using fossil fuels, also contribute significantly to data center water impacts. In 2023, data center indirect water use from electricity was estimated at 211 billion gallons, averaging 1.2 gallons per kilowatt hour. Nuclear plants also have an indirect water use impacts. And then, of course, you have the chip manufacturing itself. It's another water-intensive process. It requires ultra-pure water for cleaning and etching, and in producing 1,000 gallons of ultra-pure water consumes about 1,500 gallons of piped water, and a single chip factory can use 10 million gallons daily. And that brings us then to data center energy consumption. There is an online a think tank, the Sightline Institute in the state of Washington, that did a study just recently. It's in our resource guide. It's called A Climate Hawk's Guide to Northwest Data Centers. I was amazed when I read this study to discover the information that it contained. For example, in this slide, this graph is showing that the state of Virginia is the largest data center that is operating, and its capacity of operation is measured in megawatts. It's up to about 6,000 megawatts in 2024. But Oregon, this just took me away. Oregon hosts the second most data center capacity in the United States. And this is comparing cities across the country, and we're right up there. This is another graph that was in that study. It shows data centers consume a higher share of power in Oregon and Washington than in nearly all other states. Those down arrows that you see there are pointing to Oregon and Washington. They're combining them together. Again, the only state that goes beyond it is the state of Virginia. 25%, by the way, of Virginia's total power is consumed by data centers. That's a huge amount of energy. Data centers powering AI can require up to 100 megawatts of electricity capacity, 4 to 10 times more than data centers of the not so distant past. So getting into artificial intelligence is driving up power consumption, translating to about as much electricity as a small city uses annually. AI fuels almost all the anticipated growth in data center power demand. This shows you why in Oregon, Umatilla County was chosen to be the county that would get around our ballot measure. And what this shows is 6 utilities in Oregon and Washington that have absorbed the bulk of new data center load. And right at the top in Oregon is Umatilla Electric Cooperative. In the share of the state's new load growth from 2013 to 2023, that one little co-op had 44% of the state's load growth. And when you look at the overall utility load growth, we're talking about just the utility, it was 554%. And all that is driven by Amazon, the large data center customer that needs to be receiving power from them. And it's the same way in the state of Washington. When you look down below at the bottom of this slide, in Washington, it's Microsoft. And there are 2 public utility districts that are experiencing the share of low growth. Grant County is very equivalent to Umatilla Electric Cooperative. And together, all that is driving the need for power forecasts. And when you look at the regional power forecast that's developed by the Pacific Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which is a regional government created by Congress. And this is their 20-year regional electricity demand forecast. It shows the various energy consumers that are driving load. Hydrogen, of course, is put in here because this is an alternative form of energy that can be developed in what's called hydrogen hubs. Transportation, of course, is the need to address transcending from combustion engine automotive use to electric vehicles. And then you have the big bear, which is tech load forecast that's a part of this ninth load layer that shows what the power consumption would look like from 2025 to 2046. That, of course, though, brings us into the Trump executive orders, which is having the largest impact on our energy consumption and environmental impacts from both data centers and from nuclear power plants. And I entitled this A Requiem for Climate and Democracy. This is one of the early executive orders that Trump issued. It was entitled Protecting American Energy from State Overreach. And this is a warning. It's definitely a warning because you can see where it's going. My administration is committed to unleashing American energy, especially through the removal of all illegitimate impediments to the identification, development, siting, production, investment in, or use of domestic energy resources. And then, of course, it outlines Trump's favorites, particularly oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear energy. There's the reference to hydropower, no reference to renewable energy at all. And many states, and it goes on to state, many states have enacted or are in the process of enacting burdensome and ideologically motivated climate change. Again, Trump's hoax, or energy policies that threaten American energy dominance, a wonderful word he uses all the time, and economic and national security. They end this executive order, he ends this executive order. These state laws and policies are fundamentally irreconcilable with my administration's objective to unleash American energy. They should not stand. And I find this so ironic because remember, this is the Republican Party that swore allegiance to state rights, but now promotes authoritarianism and concentration of power in oligarchic hands of a would-be king. And in essence, this is not just happening with the regulation of nuclear power, which is happening on state level, but also it's happening to artificial intelligence and data centers. Then came the next executive order, the very next day. It was the one that provided the sunset provisions for the regulation and governing of energy production to the extent permitted by the law. And of course, we know that sunset provisions are just another way to eject regulations out of sight, out of mind. But what really is the icing on the cake, unfortunately, is AI and nuclear power on steroids, with 5 more Trump executive orders that were issued on May 23rd, 2025. All 5 issued at the same time. The first one was restoring gold standard science. Trump likes gold. He mentions it a lot. And he seems to adorn himself with it and surrounds himself with it. And his idea of restoring a gold standard is subversion of science to dominance and greed. The second executive order was entitled ordering the reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And of course, that is being done by taking away NRC's independence and dismantling its authority. The third executive order is reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base. And that's being done by winning a global race to dominate AI, energy independence, uninterruptible power for national security, all with nuclear power. And then we have the next executive order, which is reforming nuclear reactor testing at the Department of Energy. And this is a clever end run around the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because the U.S. Department of Energy is in charge of regulating nuclear plants independent of the NRC. Whatever is done by the U.S. Department of Energy, forgive me for that, is done under their own regulations. And they are doing this by significantly expediting testing, approval, and deployment of advanced reactors under DOE jurisdiction. And then last is the other end run, which is deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security. And this is the military. Trump is using the military to advance nuclear power and get around having any kind of commercial regulatory oversight as far as that goes. And that's been announced in several press releases. The Department of Navy announced solicitation for innovative energy resource resilience solutions to power Navy and Marine Corps installations. And that, by the way, is nuclear. You look at the second bullet down, it talks about advanced on-site generation, integrated next generation, small modular nuclear reactors, and so on and so forth. And again, it's another way to do it. And what you can really see is what the Army had to say about it. The Army issued a press release on October the 14th of 2025, announcing what they called the Janus program. Now, Janus was an ancient Roman god over war and peace, the beginning and ending of violence. And I've excerpted out of the press release what they have to say about this. This initiative represents a substantial investment in military and national energy dominance. There we go again. And will help chart the course for widespread deployment of microreactor power plants. It demonstrates a commitment to provide mission assurance, readiness, and lethality, there we are again, to the armed force by ensuring uninterruptible energy for training, deployment, and combat operations. Kind of interesting, though, when there's no mention of these microreactors becoming targets for contamination in the event that they're actually used on site for war. And now the Army has issued just this month a new press release in which they're going to select 9 bases for microreactors. And they're projecting 10 different reactor designs will be demonstrated in the next 24 months. We're coming to the conclusion of this slide presentation. I find this quote from Ansel Adams quite applicable. It is horrifying that we have to fight our own government to save the environment. And I've added to this, of course, and to save life itself. It's really coming down to that. And I think this wisdom is important to consider. All things are bound together. All things connect. Whatever happens to the earth happens to the children of the earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And that's from an 1854 speech of Chief Seattle. He was the leader of the Duwamish and Suquamish people, and they lived where the city of Seattle, which is named after him, is. And I like cartoons, and I'll end close with this one. This is a professor giving a lecture on matter. And in the cartoon, it says, along with antimatter and dark matter, we've recently discovered the existence of doesn't matter, which appears to have no effect on the universe whatsoever. And the message I get from this is make your life matter. This is the end of our presentation, but it does not end the marriage between small modular nuclear reactors and AI data centers. How that ends will be up to how you make your life matter. We thank you for the opportunity to present this presentation. And we are done. And I'm here to take questions. I know Kath is as well. We'll hang with you as long as we can.
All right. Well, thank you, Lloyd and Cathryn. You can take down your slides at the moment. Just stop your screen share. We'll give
Okay, I've got it. Let's see. Now I got to get to that somehow.
You're getting there.
Hold on a minute. I think I got to trade screens here. For some reason, oh, there it was right up there. Darn it. Let's see if I can bring that back. Sorry about this. Okay, here you are. Okay, stop. I got it. There it is.
The hazards
Sorry about all that. We're still learning ourselves.
No problem. No problem. Thank you very much, both of you, for just an incredibly detailed, powerful presentation, a very integrative presentation, which I think is what many of the people who came tonight are looking for. I'm going to give a few instructions and then turn it over to my colleague who will then guide you into the next session. I want to mention that this presentation is being recorded, and we will have the recording up on the NEIS YouTube page within a matter of days. I put the link for the YouTube, NEIS YouTube in our chat, and at the conclusion of tonight's presentation, you all who are here tonight will receive a copy of the chat. It'll be in a text format, but you can access the various links that you'll find in there, and they'll usually end up with quite a few good ones. Secondly, the resource guide, which Cathryn mentioned earlier, will also be attached to the email you'll get tonight. So you'll have a whole bunch of background information, I guess a lot of which was referenced here in the slides tonight. So that'll be made available to you as well. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jan Budart, who will give you instructions on how we proceed with the next part of the evening's events. So again, thank you both. Jan, take it away.
Thanks for all the people who are here. I just want to say that NEIS likes to have the audience get acquainted with the people who speak. And that's one of the reasons we conduct the Q&A as we do, calling on people to present their own questions, make their comments, and a follow-up if you have one follow-up question, but not two, because people want to speak. And if you have a comment that is not a question, you're limited to 3 minutes. So it looks like Stephen and Connie have their hands up. And so, like I said, you're allowed one follow-up question. And
every child with real assets and a shot at financial freedom.
I am a mom to my beautiful 9-month-old daughter, Isla, and I'm
please,
so excited.
excuse me, please mute yourself. Please mute yourself if you are not speaking.
Our kids up for their
Yes, thank you.
Start off with $1,000, and we can build with that money so that when she turns.
This is getting interesting.
All right, Stephen, we're going to have to skip you if you don't turn that background radio down.
As a family with newborn twins,
I don't think it's me, but because I did mute.
Well, I'm afraid it is somehow, and I'm not sure how. So see if you can work on that. We'll go to Connie.
Okay, yeah. Connie, ask your question, please.
This was an excellent presentation. Thank you. I have one quick question. I thought Lloyd said that the NRC has removed or eliminated ALARA as low as reasonably achievable.
No.
I thought it was the DOE. It's
the DOE, yes. If I did say that, I apologize.
I may have misheard. You know, I'm old.
So am I.
I'll tell you guys one quick thing. The Ohio EPA has draft rule or draft policy, it's not exactly clear to me, that AI data centers, or possibly just data centers in general, will no longer have to comply with current Ohio EPA policy and rules regarding discharge of contaminated water only into Lake Erie, based on what the NRC's favorite, dilution is the solution. So I predict that data centers will flock to the shores of Lake Erie in Ohio because they won't have to comply anymore with contaminated water discharge. It's just incredible. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that really is incredible, considering Lake Erie is probably the most polluted lake of the five
Well, and
Great
it's the
Lakes.
shallowest, so
Yeah,
just considering the sediment alone, I can send that around.
okay. And you could also put it in the chat. Cathryn, I think you want to say something. Oh, you got to get unmuted.
I grew up on Lake Erie, grew up outside of Buffalo, and I think what comes in at one end of Lake Erie will certainly affect any of us living in that region. We get lake effect snows that pull all the snow and dump it on Buffalo, and some of that's probably coming from Ohio. But anyway, that's appalling. It's the opposite of what we're trying to urge a lot of states to do, and is actually happening in Oregon and Washington, which is set some guardrails and some restrictions through, right now, Washington has a package of data center restrictions, guidelines, and Oregon passed one last year. They're not perfect. The lobbyists are trying to get them as diluted as possible, but I'm appalled at Ohio doing that. I went to school there. That's terrible news. Thank you for sharing that.
Maybe Connie can come back sometime and tell us about corruption in Ohio.
That's right.
You feel like it's a champion. Lloyd, go ahead if you have.
No. I'm just agreeing with you. Ohio is very corrupted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. I said it's the champion. Okay.
Right.
All right. We're going to Jim Ferner. Jim, would you please ask your question?
Hi, and thanks, Lloyd. I really enjoyed the effort you put in, not only for tonight, but over the years. I lived in Portland for over 30 years, started the Bike Transportation Alliance to try to decrease our reliance on the automobile. But anyway, I got two questions, and I'm kind of sarcastic, so you're going to have to take this with a grain of salt.
Okay.
Do you know if those SMRs on Army training bases have had any plans to put them on wheels so they can follow the troops when they get assigned overseas?
They do have microreactor designs that are on vehicles that would transport them.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the second one is,
good sarcastic question.
I thought it was sarcastic, but in this administration. The second question is, would it be possible to obtain a copy of your presentation for local use here in Southwest Michigan?
I'm more than willing to share.
I'd be glad to pay for it.
No, you don't have to pay for it.
Well, we'll see. And does that include the slides?
That concludes the slides, yes.
Okay.
It's been an arduous journey putting those slides together, I got to tell you.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. To last
he'll
an
be
hour?
happy to share them.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Yes,
You're welcome.
Thanks very much. And Dave, you've got a question, so unmute first.
Okay, thanks. It's unfortunate that a lot of your experiences parallel ours in Illinois in terms of the moratorium repeals that is attempted out in Washington and Oregon. We just had ours repealed this past legislative session. But I want to shift to a different aspect, and that is the issue of intersectionality, which, it's a buzzword for a long time, but it does have meaning in our work. And I'm particularly concerned and interested that even in the environmental community at large, we don't see the nuclear issues as being dealt with from environmental justice perspectives. And years ago, I met Russell Jim, the late Yakima Nation leader, who has been fighting nuclear back in decades ago. And of course, you folks have Hanford out your way. So I'd be interested in hearing a little more about the extent to which the tribes are being involved. Do they work with each other? Who do they work with? And in your experience, have you had a good collaborative relationship with them?
I'm hoping that Kathy Sampson Cruz is somewhere in this mix here, because she's one of the tribal members that we have interfaced with. She's been a strong advocate for making the nuclear industry accountable. And you're right. The social justice issue is an important issue, and especially when you look at the impacts of Hanford, as Kathy so well depicted. The tribes and Russell Jim, who you mentioned, were hugely impacted by what they did there in order to produce the plutonium that was used in nuclear weapons in World War II. And the cleanup, of course, is still an ongoing catastrophe. It's not cleaned up. They have cleaned up some stuff, but there's much more to be done. And who knows under the present administration whether, in fact, they're going to really follow through on all of that. And I just see wherever you look, when you look at the nuclear fuel cycle, you look at the uranium mining, the social justice issue there is the tribes that had to deal with the early mining of uranium up until the present day, and those abandoned uranium mines that are yet to be cleaned up. There's a legacy here, an awful legacy that doesn't seem to be exposed very well. And that's one of the reasons why when Kathy and I decided to try and put this slide presentation together, we wanted to try and do a big picture, cover as much of it as we could. And, as an activist, you note that I can talk. And a lot of times when you're invited to talk, they want to keep you down to 5 or 10 minutes. And I have a hard time doing that. And as you can see from the presentation that I put together, but the big picture is what really needs to be told here.
Go ahead, Cathryn.
Yeah, Kathy Sampson Cruz is with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, and she was driving and asked me to put the link in the chat for her tribe has been very active in attempting to hold the line on additive nuclear waste at Hanford and protective of the Oregon ballot measure law that keeps nuclear power from being sited in Oregon. And that said, that we have an organization called Columbia River Keeper. I put a link in the chat at the beginning for Columbia River Keeper if people are interested in learning more about Hanford and the issues there, because they're really universal. They're part of our country. They're part of our country's history of creating sacrifice zones. Columbia River sits on the sits between Oregon and Washington. Anything that affects Washington affects Oregon and vice versa. At Hanford, they're trying to build these small modular reactors. And if there's an accident or any kind of contamination, it will spread throughout that region on both sides of the river. And so Columbia River Keeper works with tribes, the Confederated Tribes, the Umatilla and Yakima in particular. There were 4 tribes that are affected by what happened on that reservation, the Nez Perce as well. I think I mentioned them earlier, but anyway, what I find, and it's very difficult to navigate and understand, both Oregon and Washington have built social justice planks into their clean energy laws. They say that they have to be environmentally just. And yet the industry has done advocates who are concerned about climate and the disasters with pollution that's spread and from the fossil fuel industry see nuclear power, unfortunately, as something that is reduced by the use of nuclear power. And so they're persuaded that it's a worse evil to continue fossil fuels than to do nuclear. So we run up against that all the time, but it's a case in point with, we've been fighting the small modular nuclear reactor at Hanford in our legislature, and we have brought it up continuously. And Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla showed up and spoke objecting to the two laws that I had in the presentation. There was a tribal representative from the Yakima as well who referenced that project as something that continues to threaten their treaty rights. So they're very much watchful and doing as much as they can, but unfortunately they've been denied access for decades, and they're limited to what's called tribal consultation, which they can have meetings, but they don't have a final say on it. So those aspects are really distressing. And I'll shut up and let someone else talk.
And
well, I think Dave wants a follow. Oh, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up here. More of an explanation. We have a lot of new people who have attended tonight who I've not seen before, and we're really glad about that for a lot of reasons. And I wanted to just explain, because Lloyd, you touched on it a minute ago. Most of these webinars you see on YouTube, as you pointed out, there's a long presentation and then there's maybe 5 or 10 minutes to ask questions and whatever. Night with the Experts was set up to turn that on its head. Now, you did have a long presentation tonight, but it was absolutely necessary to do it the way you did it. And I want to point out that we're wide open. We do not invite Spartans to our Night with the Expert. You guys have the gift of gab. You have a lot of information to share. Let it out. And that's what the purpose of Night with the Expert is. And next month, when some of you return, keep that in mind. We want to hear your questions and your comments and your dialogue with our speakers. Okay, back to you, Jan.
Well, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit at the end about next month's presentation. But right now we're on this presentation. And I would request Kathy Sampson Cruz, if she can, to unmute and just sort of introduce yourselves, because we'd kind of like to know what you sound like and what you have to say quickly. Are you there?
I'm not sure she's
somebody's there. Yeah. Well, maybe you don't. Oh, yep.
Hello.
There you go. Hi.
I just pulled over at Depot Bay on the beautiful Oregon coast, looking out at a few waves. I think the crab boats are still out there, but I continually worry about, radiation coming from Fukushima. Not a joke, but, we have to take a breath about that, right, folks?
Yeah.
What can I say more? I have known Lloyd and Cathy for many, many years. My family knows them and respects them, and so does my tribe. Lloyd was one of the first people that came to us. Boy, my son was, he's 42 now. I think Wind was about, out of diapers.
A wee lad.
We went to Hanford, and my dad was on the tribal kind of negotiation board at the time with Atoy Russell and some Nimipoos from Nez Perce. I think some Warm Springs Wasco people were there, and we had that big rally. It's just, I think of us now, Lloyd and Cathy, being 71 years old, and you just have to take a breath from the constant challenge and struggle that we're faced with, especially with this administration. Having said all that, I think our tribes, we have 3 tribes, the Umatilla, the Walla Walla, and the Cayuse. My tribe is the Walla Walla, the Woolpum. I'm a retired social worker by trade, and beloved Kasla, Ella, Grandma, most of the time. I think we are, I think our tide literally is changing at this moment. We have a new leadership within our tribal government. We have some young, educated people that are kind of seeing through the, excuse me, bullshit that is happening for some folks that are coming at all the tribes with their fake money, tossing it around like it's nothing, literally trying to bribe tribes to buy into this monstrosity of an idea that nuclear is going to save us, when we know darn well it will not. It is truly I look forward to our upcoming town halls that our general council chairman has arranged, and our closed tribal general council in February, because some people are going to be taken to task within our tribe, and I think that's going to ripple through the other Northwest tribes. We have some really great leaders, from the Puyallups and the Macaws in Washington, and the Yakima Nation, the Nez Perce, the Colvilles are affected. All these coastal tribes down here are also concerned that I've spoke to. So I'm really hoping that people are going to see through this smoke screen of the old, snake oil business that's happening.
Well, thank you very. Oh, thanks a lot, Kathy.
I'm not a scientist, if you will. Sometimes I like to get the true experts that can get all that wording right. But I was on the Columbia Riverkeeper board for a while. Learned a lot from my younger brother, who helped develop the Columbia Riverkeeper board with Otto Elizabeth first. And, we just have some really good allies within Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Northern California. We reach down to people that are affected with uranium mining. We can never forget, things that happened back in the early days, because there's still a terrible echo of injustice that's happened, not just with us, and I don't mean to sound less than, but across the world. And
well, we'll be dealing with that next at our next meeting, because we're going to have a woman from Australia. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kathy, but we've got 4 or 5 hands up. And so I'd like to go
enjoy
on.
the rest of your time, because you have the experts on board. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contribution and for the work you've been doing. And we see Dave has got his thumbs up, and we really appreciate your contribution. Okay, so I think we're trying to get Stephen Sondheim on again.
You've got me. You've got me.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. It's Stephen Sondheim from Chicago, and I'm part of the Nuclear Free Sierra Club team. Lloyd and Cathryn, I learned so much. I know a lot about this, but I learned so much. What a great presentation. And what I wanted to point out and question is about the data centers. They are depending on the public to fund them. Now, how about getting them insisting that they fund themselves instead of
what an idea?
Yeah, and I think that if they did, they'd still do data centers, but not as many. And this is part of another phenomenon, which is our utility rates are rising like crazy, and the affordability crisis is really disturbing people, and it's even on the legislators' minds. So I maintain that if they had to pay for it themselves and pay for the energy and deal with the regulations, what do you all think of that? And is that possible?
The only thing I would say about this is that the legislature in Oregon has also come up with this idea as well. because it's becoming quite clear that the tremendous rate increases that are going on across the country are very much interrelated with the hard push to put in data centers pretty much everywhere. In fact, speaking of Sam Altman, he recently said that a large part of the earth is going to be covered by data centers. That's his projection into the future. You know, it kind of reminds me of the way nuclear power was sold to us. The Pied Pipers come to town, the big promise is being given to us all, and we're just being asked to live through it, and we're not going to really, I don't believe, like the outcome. And so I'm with you. I think that these concepts need to be paid for by those that promote it, and if they're not accepted by a community, they shouldn't be there.
Yeah. I have another question that it's a little bit different, but the people are afraid that China and the other countries are going to get, quote, ahead of us on AI. Therefore, even though they don't like the fact that we have to donate so much of our resources, it's like it's a have to survive kind of thing. And it's difficult to argue with. I don't agree with it. But I think that's one of the pressures. And see, people will do anything. They'll deny their children. They'll do anything in order to survive economically. And I just want to point out that's a big fear factor. How true that is,
it's a fear that's being used against us. I mean, that's really what's going on here. You know, I have been greatly concerned about climate change and, you know, the global warming that we're experiencing and the predictions about where it is that we're going. You know, it seems to me that the time has come for cooperation to become the goal of policy amongst people as how we're going to live, because this competition thing is just leading us, I think, into the doom that projects. And I'm hoping that somehow or another we're going to see that the time for radical change, and I mean radical change, has come. We need to live differently. We really do. And we need to work in cooperation with the people of the planet, not against each other in some kind of competition, which is yet just another race into who knows what oblivion.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to give a stack. It starts with, it says Roberta, but it looks more like Howard. He'll be our next questioner. And then Becca Becca had her hand up a long time ago, and we're going to call on Diane and then Jake. So let's start with, I think, Howard, not Roberta. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Malthus used to say that we're going to have starvation in the world because we can't produce enough food. Right? I'm not defending nuclear power in any way. I had a different question. The world has a demand for energy. Do we have the capacity to produce the energy necessary to meet the world's needs if we don't use nuclear power?
Go ahead.
Well,
Cathryn.
you know,
Yeah.
to me, this issue reminds me of the idea of growth. You know,
Yeah.
we seem to have growth for the sake of growth, which ironically enough has been well compared to cancer, is a way to ruin yourself. Cancer is also cells that are growing for the sake of growth, and that's it. I I I don't think there's enough energy in the world to meet growth for sake of growth. I really don't. And I think ultimately that's what we're going to see, especially when, again, we're not doing anything, at least according to the Trump administration, we're not going to do anything about climate change. And what does that mean? That means that we are going to see more and more agricultural land disappear because it can't support food growth if you don't have moderate temperatures and you have the ability to have water and so forth. And so we're really heading into this clash with ourselves. And if we're not willing to control ourselves, I think the planet is going to be more than willing to do something about us.
Do you have any comment there, Cathryn?
Well, I think some of your question could be addressed by just the assumption that nuclear somehow does better than or more than what we already have available, which is scalable at local levels across the world. They're doing an amazing amount of renewable energy in Africa. They're doing an amazing amount of renewable energy in China. We keep hearing we have to get ahead of China, but China's renewable energy last year was off the charts. And sure, it did some nuclear, but in the perspective of the proportion or the percentage, it's nothing in terms of, or it's very little in terms of the entire energy needs of the world and what it can do with these expensive long time frames. We've got another decade, and anybody pursuing nuclear right now to do new builds is using fossil fuels for the next decade. So look at the impacts that are happening for people in the meantime all across the world. I really believe there are alternate strategies that the nuclear industry and very conventional utility thinkers who want to do capital construction and not do distributed generation and the kinds of things that can be done in local communities, those are barriers that we need to address. That's my input.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the statistic was that China is producing as much nuclear power in 6 years down the line, as they did in renewables in 2024. So China is doing a great deal with renewables, but still building some nuclear. And I hope I'm being fair here. I want to call on Roberta, wait, that wasn't Roberta, sorry. I wanted to call on Becca next because I felt like her hand was up first. So Becca, would you mind going ahead?
Hi there, thank you. And yeah, I'm a Washington State resident and longtime organizer, and Dave Kraft at NEIS was my first and longtime mentor. We worked together at NEIS in 1993 when I was in college. I appreciate this conversation so much, especially, I learned that it was 5 years ago that the price point for solar production, it became the cheapest form of energy production, which really tipped the scales. And so while our government is not incentivizing or they're actively disincentivizing renewables, we are missing the boat on solar, and China's producing the bulk of that new technology. I am also super appreciative of hearing from Kathy from the Confederated Tribes. I think you answered a lot of my questions, but I'm just wondering if Kathy or our guest speakers can say a little bit more about the campaign end of things in the Pacific Northwest around the Amazon expansion. Are there any kind of key pushes coming up? Any public work in terms of rallies or very visible stuff, anything that you're able to share?
So in Washington, the Sierra Club is very actively opposing the legislation that's going on right now with our short session and our budget reality. One thing we're doing is trying to mobilize people to communicate with their legislators and with the committees that are hearing these bills. And there's an organization called 350 Seattle as an example. They have a network where they have people sign in. Washington has a wonderful legislative tool where you can just sign in pro or con on a bill. You don't have to testify. And so we were able to generate like 350 3-to-1 con comments on the bill that would have required utilities to, or allowed utilities to sign contracts that would have me as a ratepayer in Washington paying for these projects, whether they ever get done or not. So I think right now we're doing groundwork on the, trying to educate legislators, trying to educate people in the community. There's hopefully going to be more visibility as this goes on. What I wanted to point out, there's an article that I put in the chat at the beginning that it was news yesterday. It was National Public Radio revealed that the White House has been rewriting rules for the Department of Energy agencies that are dealing with nuclear, and in secret with not our input. And on those two bills that I talked about in my presentation, I was communicating with one of the legislators. She sent me that article and said, I can't support this legislation anymore. And she's a proponent of one of the other pro-nuclear bills. So people are starting to get an awareness. They're starting to make connections between their electricity bills. And so at the PUD level, we have to be tracking what our commissioners in our PUDs are doing as far as buying into the project at Hanford. So there's a lot of different things. I'm not sure there's anything right now in terms of anything visible, but there are a lot of in your community and with your legislator and with some of the environmental organizations that you can tap into. And they have rally days sometimes in the legislature. We've had those in Oregon where we had Keep Oregon Nuclear Free in that legislature. So if
I have a
you're
very
interested.
brief response to this. Have PowerPoint, will Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also curious if, there's such a robust organizing network around the Amazon worker campaigns, unionizing and protecting. I wonder if there are potential unusual bedfellows for this.
That's a good question.
I think the social justice issue is what is allowing us to cross the lines between issues to join together, which makes us that much more powerful. And so, I agree with you. I think there are areas in which we can cooperate.
That's one of the things that this thing that's happening right now, where the regulations that protect our public health and our workers' safety, it applies directly to workers at Hanford and at the Amazon that will work on this project. There are provisions in there that lower the radiation that get rid of the protections, and workers are going to be far more exposed. And that's why I said earlier, I thought this news about what these regulations, how they're being rewritten, will help us mobilize workers because right now the big push is jobs. Let's get jobs. Let's get high-paying jobs. And the way to separate that out is to start talking about, well, what goes on in those jobs, and particularly in the nuclear industry. This is a risk, and I think labor will be at least amenable to knowing about it if they know that, for instance, Energy Northwest is trying to change the law that currently exists in Washington to allow their workers not to have to be subject to the law about presumptive disease. If you get right now at Hanford and in any nuclear facility, including Columbia Generating Station and eventually the Amazon reactors, if you have a radiation potential illness, you're presumed to have that from your work. And Energy Northwest behind the scenes is lobbying to get an exemption. So I don't think that's going to go over very well with labor. And it's our job to promote that information so that people are aware of what's going on behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Jan, if I could just interject for a minute. I'm not going to let you off the hook, Becca. My friend Becca is, for a long time now, been conducting a program called the Natural History Museum. I was wondering if you'd say a few words about that and maybe put a contact website or something in the chat before you sign off tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. I will drop in a website. We are a traveling and online museum for the movement is what we call ourselves. It was started by artists and activists and scholars and organizers. And we were based in New York for almost 10 years, but working around the country. And moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2018 because we'd been working with tribes out here, in particular, Hassateers Carvers and the Lummi Nation. We've done exhibitions around fossil fuel expansion, the totem pole journeys, as well as the Snake River salmon and orca protection stuff. So Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation was actually a site for a pop-up exhibition that we did with folks from Nimipu and Umatilla and Lummi. So I still feel like I'm a relative newcomer to the region, and I'm excited to follow up with Kathy and Lloyd and hear more about your work and get plugged in.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I would just add too that Becca was previously a Night with the Experts presenter. So if you go to the NEIS YouTube page, you can see the episode that she put together on arts and activism a few years back. Okay, sorry to interrupt so much, but it's important.
Yeah. Okay, so now the stack is Diane, Jake, and I guess Dave has put his hand down because he's already spoken. So Diane, you're next, and thank you for being here, and let's hear your question.
Well, first of all, I want to really praise Cathryn and Lloyd for approaching this issue on so many levels at once, and bouncing back and forth and transitioning. It's been terrific. And I hate to bring it down to a more mundane regulatory specific because I like the larger global approach, but I wanted to, since we've got Northwest activists here and you have one of the so-called commercial low-level radioactive waste dumps in Washington, I wanted to just raise a little flag that when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proposes its changes in all of its regulations, that I am suspecting that 10 CFR 61, the regulations for burial of nuclear waste, and as I said, Hanford has a commercial burial ground run by U.S. Ecology in area 200 of the Hanford Reservation, but it's a commercial private dump. And what this regulation change, it's been tried over and over again over the decades. And my fear is that, well, while we're ramming through everything, taking away the basis for radiation protection, and again, I want to appreciate your summary of some of the executive orders. It's not expressly in them, but I'm worried that the 10 CFR 61 could be changed to enable the operator of the dump to do a probabilistic performance assessment to claim that any amount of waste and radioactivity, any class or characterization of waste, all of the orphan waste that's out there with nowhere to go, if it goes into their dump, it will give a legal dose to people in 1,000 years or whatever the regulations will be requiring. So I want to work together with folks in the Northwest on that piece of it. It may not happen, but it may come up at the last minute among the many other things that we're going to be facing when the drafts come out for their 30-day comment. Sorry that took so long. I thought it would only take a second.
It was good, Diane. Cathryn, you don't need to put your hand up. You get a chance to talk.
In response to that, fortunately and unfortunately, we have an outfit called an organization called Heart of America Northwest out here. Jerry Pollitt has worked with interns for years to uncover some of the waste issues that you're referring to. He tried last year to educate our legislators about how there is actually a waste dump that's in the middle of it's part of the compact where low level but not low risk waste goes. And he introduced a bill into our short session. I'll send you what that was. Unfortunately, we couldn't persuade the Energy Committee to give it a hearing. This is just a very short session, primarily budget related, but he's laying the groundwork to educate not just legislators, but everyone around what's really at Hanford, which it's so mixed with all of those things. And his bill says no small modular reactors can be built there, if ever, until that site is investigated, remediated, no more of this stuff coming in and it's a pretty globalizing bill, but it's a start.
I just want to thank Diane for your long years of activism. You affected me as an activist, and I appreciate what you have done.
Likewise for both of you, well, especially Lloyd, because I've only met Cathryn in the last decade, but Lloyd's been around for longer than I have.
Right.
So on that, because we have a lot of Northwest people, I'm hoping that when that rises up, if it rises up, that we can work together to slam it down.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So Jake is our next questioner. So Jake, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, thank you for your excellent presentation. I just want to say, I think I heard the news about a week ago in city of Aurora, which is a Chicago suburb. There are like four data centers that have already moved in, and the council there is trying to pass an ordinance saying in so many words, that if the data centers are to open, if more data centers are to open up here, then they have to provide their own power source. That's number one. Number two, this is an election year. There's an off-year election year. I'm wondering if any of the candidates in Oregon or anywhere else that you've seen have put up a pledge not to take any campaign contributions from the utility companies.
Well, I can't speak to that latter part of your question, but I do want to address the concept of the data centers providing their own power. It seems to me that there's no fear with that now. Amazon, as Kathy pointed out in her presentation, dumped a whole bunch of money on Energy Northwest in order, which is unusual because usually the way the data centers have operated, they built themselves and then they contract whatever local utility there is to provide them power. This is Amazon going proactive. They're taking their money and they're investing it before there's even power to get. They're giving a huge sum of money. They're rolling in cash. And so the other thing that too is kind of concerning to me is I've heard that there is some effort to say that, as far as regulation goes, if you have an entity that's providing their own power, well, they're not connected to the grid, so therefore you don't have to have the regulatory agencies that would normally have oversight over this new power source coming in. So I think we got to be very cautious about this. I personally don't want to just sit here and say, fine, go off and, build your power source, because I know what they're going to try and do, which is the nuclear industry's knocking on their door and saying, please take one of our micro reactors. There you go,
All right. I get a follow-up question, quick.
Jake, before you go on.
This will take, yeah, right. Okay.
I'm just going to say
Yeah.
it's 8:53 in
Okay.
Chicago, and so
this will take me this will take me 2 minutes. What happens if they build all these data centers, this huge infrastructure, and they have no customers for it?
Well,
Does
that's
that mean
interesting.
does that mean we pay for bankruptcy? This is a move towards bankruptcy.
I think that is again coming down to the idea of us as consumers having a choice and how we want to live our lives. I'm not necessarily making a case against not having some use of, your computer and the information that you can generate from that. But I think also at the same time, it really does come down to how we want to live. I'm not certain I want to spend all my life looking at a screen. And I'm looking at one now.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Also, there's a lot of new people here, and I should have mentioned this earlier. It would be great if you'd put your email in the chat as much as you possibly can. It would be really helpful to the people who are here that might want to contact you. So if you can get your email in the chat, everybody who's here, we would appreciate it. And gosh, it's like 6 minutes to the hour now, and we're going to call on Dave Kraft again. Dave?
Sorry for having such a big mouth tonight, but Cathryn, you brought up the issue of labor, and I wanted to bounce something off you. Maybe it's useful out there, maybe not, but it's something that we've struggled with here in Illinois. The problem we've had with having the largest nuclear utility in the country based here, Constellation, we've got 11 operating reactors and 3 that were closed, is, the infiltration into the community all over the, politically especially, but economically as well. So with the large reactors, we had the problem of labor being on the side of the utility for jobs and the local communities being on the side of the utilities for tax-based purposes. So those are 2 real tough mountains to climb, and we always came up on the short end. Recently, though, even though we lost the moratorium piece, and this is where we kind of come over to you, we thought, all right, well, you can have your new reactors, but maybe there should be a state law that requires a proactive just transitions economic package to be put in place so that when a reactor closes, and it will eventually, the community doesn't suffer and lose tax base. The workers don't have nothing to fall back on, no job training, whatever. And that has to be paid into with a percentage of revenues coming out of the new reactor. So I'm wondering, you may have a much better relationship with labor out your way, and this would be something you could add to the package of demand a proactive just transitions closure law and see how many reactors you get built then. Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah.
My one response to that is actually what's happening right now in the federal administration is mind-boggling. And we had a coal plant that the Sierra Club that I worked with at the time spent a long time closing this coal plant that finished December 31st this year. And it has been in cold shut down for a while. And the Trump administration is requiring that it open back up and do coal on the basis of, that's a wild card that right now we're going to be struggling with, I think, in the next several years over the federal preemption of anything energy related. But I would love to see what you're talking about, Dave. And I think that there are some legislators that would be interested in pursuing something like that. It's a great idea. I mean, we did have a very strong just transition package for that coal plant, and it was doing great in terms of transitioning to renewable energy. But guess who came lurking in the background? They want to put small modular reactors at that coal facility. So, it's sometimes you throw up your hands and you say, you can't. And that's the problem of the industry co-opting social and environmental justice to convince people that it's really environmentally just to do nuclear because it lowers the pollution level at the generating site, and they forget all the other things, and people are buying it. And that's a problem too we have to face, educate our labor force on it too.
Okay, we'll talk offline about that. I've
Okay.
often felt that nuclear power is sort of the energy version of herpes. You know, it never goes away and it comes back worse the next time around, you know. And this is one of the areas where I think that fits. Okay, back to you, Jen.
There are such interesting uh, uh, comments in the chat. We're going to save the chat. Mark Lundholm has made interesting comments. Ace put something in. Ed McCardle, you really should take a look at the chat because we will send it out to you.
Thank you.
It'll go to everybody, won't it, Dave? And so it's really late. And I'm going to cut Stephen off because he did get a chance to ask a question previously. I think it's time that we close this. I wonder, it seems like I cut Lloyd off if you want to say something, but after Lloyd and Cathryn have their final words, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to bring the session to a close. Does that seem right to everybody? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe Stephen could put his comment or question in the chat. That would be great.
Good
and
idea.
Then we can
Yeah,
later.
Steve, go ahead and put your question in the chat right now. And
I did. I put in the chat 2 webinars
okay.
from New York, and you guys take a look at them. They were very comprehensive. Thank you.
Okay. And so if Lloyd and Cathryn have any closing comments, go ahead now.
You want to go, Kathy?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for being such a great listening audience and having patience with our occasional stumbles, but it was great being here. Thank you very much.
And I just want to say I am very impressed with the Nuclear Energy Information Service. You guys really have it down. You know, this is the first time that I've done a Zoom, and you have professionally put it together, and I really greatly appreciate the opportunity that you provided us to share the information that we've been trying to communicate to others.
Well, thank you very much. And so I'm turning it over to Dave, back over to him. It is 1 minute past the hour, and here's his screen.
Maybe. Okay. Again, thank both of you for coming. And I really appreciate the comment. It's amazing what we can do with smoke and mirrors sometimes. So, yes, just a couple of reminders to those of you who are still with us. You will receive a copy of the chat tonight, probably within the hour, I hope. And within the chat is also going to be, you'll have a version of the resource guide that Cathryn mentioned earlier. In fact, Lloyd and Cathryn, if there's a contact, either website or anything you want to leave before you sign off, put it in the chat so that people can contact you if they need to. So yes, you will get the chat, the resource guide. We hope to have the recording up in the next couple of days or so, as soon as we get the Zoom information back. And next month, as Jan pointed out, we're going to continue this notion of community-based activism all the way down under. We're going to hear from someone from Australia talking about the nuclear situation out there. And we are hoping in March, we still haven't confirmed it yet, we are trying to get Dr. Mayra Gomez from University of New Mexico to talk about nuclear colonialism, which is another thing we want to push forward. Is the colonial aspects of nuclear power are rearing their ugly heads again in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia one more time. So that's what is coming up on our programs. So
let me just say that Liz Tynan, who will be our presenter, has written Atomic Thunder, the story of Maralinga, and she has written The Secret of Emu Field, which is those are 2 colonized areas in Australia that displaced the Aboriginal people and with no warning, probably. But so that's things that you could look at, those books that she wrote. One is called Atomic Thunder, and the other one is called The Secret of Emu Field.
Mhm. So that'll be next month, last Thursday of the month. That's when we do this program. So now you guys know how it operates. Next month, we expect you'll bring guests with you, so you're not sitting there alone. You can drink together that way. So thank you for coming tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope that you'll network with one another, those of you who just got to know one another tonight, and build a stronger movement as a result of this. So again, Cathryn, Lloyd, thank you very much. And we wish the rest of you a good January. Good night.
Thanks. Thanks all.
So long, farewell, it's awfully good to see you.
The song I've been thinking of all evening is Roll on, Columbia, roll on, roll. Your power is turning our darkness to dawn. Roll on, Columbia, roll on.
There you go.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the gallery. Let's see who's left here.
Where'd you go?
Who's the hardcore? There they are.
Activist hussy, you know.
All right.
You were wonderful.
I'm so glad Kelly.
I should have recorded this. I'm sorry. We turned out to record.
They did.
Were we supposed to continue in this conversation?
You're still here. You're still here.
Yeah, we're here. Hold on.
We just wanted to have a few words with you when everybody else got
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Unfortunately, I've discovered that if you drink tea during a presentation, you have to go to the bathroom.
Well, that's what Catherine is for, you know.
This is just a new
Thank you. Have a good night. Have a good night.
I'm back
Good
again.
night.
I'm
Good night,
back
Jake.
again.
Good night, Jake. Good night.
Cass here too.
I left early. I mean, after you closed it down, so okay.
All right, folks, go get a life. We want to sign.
Thank you, everybody. This was great.
It really was.
Yeah.
You guys really have it together. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
Well,
as Jan
so do
said,
you.
this started out as a Skype thing, and we were doing it in person, and we would get maybe 5 to 10 people, you know. And then, strangely enough, COVID is what changed this thing totally around.
That's right. Yeah.
We had no choice but to do this online. And then we learned Zoom, obviously. And the rest is history, as they say. So,
Well, it's wonderful. It really is. And I'm glad we have a chance to experience what you have put together.
well, you'll be able to use it. As I say, we're going to get the recording out to you. You do whatever you want with it. Put it up on a website or put a link to, send it to your legislators.
You know, it's really the
Seriously.
COVID thing has really helped with the legislature because I don't have to drive up to Olympia, which is a 2.5-hour drive to testify at a hearing. I
Yeah.
can be remote. And so they're getting a lot more people. And it has a downside because we get sometimes even a minute to speak because they have so many people that are showing up to be in the legislative sessions. And one time I had to do 3 bills in 90 seconds. So, but
Yeah, don't get me going on the legislature because I take great umbrage with the way, people who are paid to represent us are now basically discarding us. You have a minute to address important issues that last for a long time in our future.
Yeah, we had the same experience here. Going down there, it's sort of like 300 Spartans kind of situation.
Yeah, that's right.
The legislators already have their minds made up. You're the only
Right.
negative voice. And as you say, they give you 5 whole minutes to talk about the entire energy future of the state of Illinois. It's like, well, thank you,
Right.
gentlemen. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we're not even seeing 5 minutes anymore. That's history for Oregon. We're getting it now down to 1 minute, 2 minutes. I mean,
Well, yeah, you'll get the 5 minutes if you register in advance and they approve it. The other folks, you're right, they only get,
not here in Oregon.
Oh,
Let me
okay.
tell you, what they've been doing here in Oregon is they form panels of the proponents of the bills, and they get to speak forever.
Yep.
And then they put the limitations on anybody that's opposing what they want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I read the riot act to one of the legislators recently who he was naive enough, he's a relatively new senator, to ask, how I feel the hearing went or whatever, and I just let him have it. Said it was total bullshit. There's no opportunity for cross-examination or contesting the other person's point of view. You guys got your minds made up. What's the point? I haven't heard back from him. So the person who is hanging on here, I don't know if she's still listening or not, but Nicole Salisbury is someone who has been following us for quite a while and worked with Sierra Club. And she was actually their legislative liaison to Springfield, Illinois, which is our capital. And if she is listening, feel free to pipe in, Nicole, about your horror stories of lobbying in Illinois. But maybe not. Okay.
Sausage making. It's sausage making.
Worse than that.
It is worse than that. It really is.
Can turn your hair blue.
And on that note, Jan, we should let you go have dinner.
Well, I'm just one. I guess Nicole did leave. Oh, well, too bad.
I removed her just now. I think she was there.
Okay.
If you could, I don't know if we have a mailing address for you guys. If you just
We do. We have one we can
email it to me, will you? If we'd appreciate it.
Okay.
And the woman who spoke tonight, where did Heidi Cody come from? Okay. Hi, Heidi. We're finished. Sorry to say.
She probably got the time wrong. Hi, Heidi.
Yeah.
I'm in an organization with
One of your folks? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Heidi. You'll have to wait for the recording.
I totally missed it. What time did it start at?
Totally.
It started at 5.
Oh, well, I was way off.
That's
Well, sorry to interrupt the wrap up.
I'll
be happy to watch the recording.
You're not going to miss anything. NEARS makes very good effort.
It's not NEIS. It's not NEARS.
Yeah, right. Makes a very good effort to make sure that we all get an opportunity to see it over and over and over, and also get the chat.
Good. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I got to go because I got to go pick up my daughter. I was intending to just be like a pacifist listener, innocent bystander. But I'm going to hang up so I don't kill someone because it's not.
Don't be a pacifist. Be an
activist.
Okay.
Meet you and do great things out there.
Yeah. Congrats. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye. We have an intern. We have an intern that will be excerpting the recording so that as sort of like a prequel or for people to come. It's the same one who interviewed you.
She was
great. You met Lily. So
we enjoyed our interview.
Yeah, we enjoyed our interview with her.
Yeah, we have two other people.
She did a great job on the video.
Yeah.
We have 2 other people who are now going to work on the post event process.
Oh, great.
There will be a transcript that'll be provided and the actual 2 or 3 minute segments out of what you did tonight. So
that's great.
That'll take a little longer, but it'll be up there. I just wanted to underscore, I was thrilled to see my old friend Becca. I mean, I knew she moved out to the Pacific Northwest, and I know what she's been doing working with the tribes, but I really do hope that you folks connect with her. She is a treasure, pure heart, just a really, really good, solid connection if you guys can make it. And if not,
all right.
I'll force it on you, so.
Well, the tribes are under fire. The Energy Northwest hired a tribal liaison, somebody from Alaska who is much more into nuclear, and she's coordinating the outreach. And with Amazon's deep pockets, these tribes are just facing this onslaught of enticement and seduction. And Kathy, who spoke tonight, is a stalwart, long time. She's kind of the elder backbone of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. And she almost single-handedly has guided her tribe through times when they actually had a lot of in their leadership that had gone to the dark side. So I'm glad she had a chance to speak tonight.
Yeah,
is that person from Alaska, Watson?
No.
Yeah, because she's been coming to the Friday meeting, and I thought she was definitely anti-nuclear. Yeah.
No, that's somebody different.
Jan and I met one of the people from Energy Northwest was it last year or the year before? DOA was doing the consent-based siting dog and pony.
Yeah, there we go.
And they sent a couple of the Northwest people out, and so I mean, we've been through this with the siting of high-level radioactive waste. I mean, the go shoots. Kevin Camps worked for years with the go shoots, and they beat that one back. And of course, Western Shoshone, and find a poor Indian tribe. In fact, Leona Leduc was very sarcastic that
no, it's Winona.
Yeah, Winona Leduc very sarcastically said, "At last we have found a solution for the disposal of radioactive waste. It's called Indian reservations."
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, have a great weekend.
All right.
Yeah, you both
Thank
be
you
well.
guys. Great job. Terrific slideshow.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
It was all really good.
Is that available, or will it be posted somewhere? Or?
I can send it to you if you. We'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want the PowerPoint version?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
good. Yeah, we'll send it to you and make use of it in whatever way you want.
He's lost a lot of nights' sleep over the minutia of doing those slides, and they did turn out pretty good.
They really did. Really, really.
Yeah, they
did.
were very good.
Excellent.
Thank you. It's my canvas.
Okay.
All right. Sleep well.
Thanks.
Good night.
Be
Thank you,
well.
guys.
Good night, all.
Yes.
I don't know how to leave.
I don't know how to get out of here.
You're stuck.
Let's see.
Oh no,
here
we're
we
going to be
are.
here forever.
This is like the Twilight Zone. You
Is
never.
that it? Okay, I'm going to leave. Goodbye.
Goodbye.